Good morning, brothers and sisters. Have you ever found yourself in a place so dark, so lonely, that you cried out to God, but all you heard was silence? You poured out your heart in prayer, begging for help, for guidance, for a sign, and nothing. No answer, no comfort, just quiet. Maybe you've wondered, why does God stay silent during my hardest moments? Why doesn't he speak when I need him most? It's a question that has troubled many souls throughout history. When life's storms rage fiercely, when pain and suffering feel unbearable, and when hope seems so distant, the silence can be deafening. It makes us question everything, our faith, our worthiness, even God's love. Today, in this video, I want to speak directly to that question. I want to help you understand the deep reasons behind God's silence during your toughest trials. This silence is not a sign of abandonment or indifference. There is a purpose, a divine reason that can transform the way you see your struggles and strengthen your faith. If you've been wrestling with this silence, searching for meaning in your pain, then stay with me. I will share powerful insights that will help you not only survive the silence, but embrace it as a sacred part of your spiritual journey. You'll learn how silence can reveal your true dependence, strengthen your character, prepare you for blessings, and invite you to trust God's perfect timing. So, if you're ready to find peace in the quiet and discover why God is silent during your hardest moments, then watch on. If this message touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. God's silence is one of the most misunderstood aspects of the spiritual journey. When the prayers go unanswered, the doors stay shut, and the pain lingers, it's easy to assume that heaven has turned its face away. But silence is not the same as absence. When God is silent, it often means he is preparing something bigger than what you're currently asking for. In a classroom, the teacher prepares the students for an exam through lessons, discussions, and practice. But during the test, the teacher is silent, not because she has left, but because it is the student's time to act on what has already been taught. In the same way, God prepares us through seasons of teaching and growth. When we are tested, when we're in the fire of hardship, his silence challenges us to apply faith, recall his promises, and walk in trust without needing constant confirmation. Preparation is uncomfortable. It stretches you, it forces you to look within, not just around. Think of David, anointed as king, but then sent back to tend sheep. There was no trumpet announcing the fulfillment of the promise, just quiet, repetitive days in the field. God was building character in him, shaping his heart, and preparing his leadership long before the crown ever touched his head. When God is silent, he may be removing distractions. He may be refining your heart. He may be orchestrating divine appointments that your eyes cannot yet see. Silence is often the construction site of destiny. Blueprints are being drawn, materials gathered, foundations laid, all before the structure ever rises above the ground. Joseph's life is a blueprint of divine silence. After the dreams of greatness came betrayal, slavery, and prison. For 13 years, he experienced divine silence, no angel visits, no prophetic confirmations. Just endurance and confusion, but when the silence broke, Joseph stepped into a role that saved nations. What you interpret as neglect may actually be nurturing. God trusts you with silence because he knows what he placed in you. He knows your potential. He knows your capacity to grow through the test. The silence is his vote of confidence in your spiritual maturity. It's the space he gives for you to rise to the occasion, not with your strength, but by trusting in his unseen hand. When God is silent, it causes you to tune your ear to a different frequency. Most people want to hear God in thunder, fire, or obvious miracles, but God often speaks in stillness. His silence reshapes the way you listen, not just for noise, but for depth, for discernment, for the subtle nudges of his spirit. In 1 Kings 19, Elijah had just experienced a supernatural victory, yet ran into the wilderness in fear and despair. He cried out to God, desperate for assurance. God's response came, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a still small voice. That whisper required Elijah to be quiet himself. You can't hear a whisper if you're shouting. Silence demands humility. In our digital, noisy world, we've grown uncomfortable with quiet. We want answers in 30 seconds, replies in 3 minutes, and breakthroughs by tomorrow morning. But when God goes silent, He's retraining your spirit to listen, not with your ears, but with your heart. Real listening happens when distractions are removed. Silence causes you to examine your motives, your thoughts, your dependencies. It reveals what you truly believe. Are you following God for His hand or for His heart? Are you committed to your calling, or just attached to the comfort of clarity? God's silence often comes after a word has already been given. He's not obligated to repeat himself just because we've become afraid. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, Moses cried out in panic. But God said, "Why are you crying out to me? Move forward." The instruction had already been given. Now was the time for action. Learning to listen differently means learning to trust what God said, even when He's not saying anything new. It requires rehearsing past victories, meditating on Scripture, and allowing silence to sharpen your spiritual perception. In silence, you learn to sense His presence, not just hear His voice. You recognize His leading in peace, in conviction, in doors that open and shut. Sometimes God's silence teaches you to value His voice more. It deepens your hunger. It breaks spiritual entitlement. It moves you from being a passive hearer to an active seeker. During silence, journal what He's already said, reflect on the last promise, revisit the last assignment. God isn't random. If He's quiet, it's not because He's gone. It's because He's already spoken and now wants you to trust Him in the dark. In the midst of difficulty, when God appears silent, what is really happening is an invitation. It is an invitation to deepen your faith beyond the surface level. Many people's faith is built on what they see, hear, or experience visibly, but true faith is tested and proven in the silence, when no sign or answer comes. Abraham's story is a perfect example. He was promised a son, a nation, and a blessing. Yet for decades he waited in silence, no baby in sight, no fulfillment of the promise. The silence was not a mistake, but a divine test. God was calling Abraham to trust Him completely, not just for the promise, but for the character that would sustain him when the promise arrived. Faith grows in the soil of silence because it forces you to look beyond natural evidence. When God is quiet, you either build your hope on what is seen or on what is unseen. The unseen is the kingdom of faith. The Bible calls faith the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. When God stops answering loudly, you must embrace the invisible reality of His presence and power. Silence also challenges impatience. The world lives by instant gratification. We expect quick fixes, immediate breakthroughs, and answers on demand. But faith that lasts requires patience. The silence teaches patience by stretching your trust over time. It molds your spirit to endure, to wait, and to remain steadfast in the middle of uncertainty. Sometimes God's silence is His way of teaching you to hold your peace in the storm. It's not that He is ignoring your cries. Rather, He is inviting you to enter into a deeper place of confidence, a place where your faith does not depend on visible proof, but on the reality of His promises. When the silence feels longest, that's often when God is closest, inviting you to lean harder on Him. Look at the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed intensely, yet the answer to His request was delayed. The silence was deafening, but it was within that silence that His faith was made perfect. He trusted the Father's plan despite the agony of the unknown. Faith developed in silence has eternal power. It is the kind of faith that moves mountains, breaks chains, and sustains through the darkest nights. When God is silent, He's not silent forever. He's silent to grow you into a person who can hold onto His promises without needing constant reassurance. Silence from God during hard times can easily be mistaken for permission to stop trying or to give up. But often, silence is a call to action. It's a moment when God says, "Now it's your move." The instructions are not always spelled out in the moment of difficulty, but the responsibility to act remains. When the Israelites faced the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them, God did not speak a new word. The plan had already been revealed. It was time to step forward in faith. Sometimes waiting for a word means learning to move without one. The silence forces us to rely on previous revelation and trust rather than new directions. The greatest mistake during silence is paralysis. Fear whispers you're alone, you have no guidance. But this is exactly when God is testing whether you will take the next step in faith. Every step taken in obedience, even when unsure, positions you for breakthrough. Consider Nehemiah. When Jerusalem's walls lay broken and the people were discouraged, Nehemiah did not wait for new instructions. He acted on the vision already given. The silence that followed was not a void, but a space to build courage and resolve. His action sparked a movement that restored a city. Action during silence requires courage. It demands that you trust not your understanding, but the voice you have already heard. It means taking the next right step, even if the full path is not visible. This kind of faith-driven action becomes a testimony of trust that inspires others. Silence is also a call to prepare. Sometimes God is silent because He wants you to get ready, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, for the moment when He breaks through. You might not see the whole picture, but you must gather resources, develop skills, and strengthen your heart. Preparation is action in the silence. In personal experience, there are moments when you've prayed and waited for a sign or word from God, and none came. Yet, as you pushed forward writing that book, starting that business, making that phone call, you discovered God had already gone ahead of you. The silence was never emptiness, it was the calm before the breakthrough. God's silence also protects. Sometimes, if He answered immediately, you wouldn't be ready for the blessing or breakthrough. The silence keeps you growing, strengthening your faith, and preparing your heart to receive what's coming. If you wait for every door to open before moving, you'll remain stuck. But if you act in faith, moving through closed doors with prayer and obedience, you position yourself for God to open doors that were never visible from where you stood. When God is silent during your hardest moments, the silence acts like a mirror. It reveals the true foundation of your trust. Under pressure, true dependence surfaces. If your faith is built on God's actions, your circumstances, or others' responses, silence exposes these weaknesses. Silence removes distractions and forces you to confront what you truly rely on. Is your peace tied to a job, a relationship, or a routine? When those are stripped away, what remains? The silence tests whether you depend on the immutable God or the mutable things around you. Jesus taught that the kingdom of God is not dependent on what we see, but on a deeper spiritual reality. When God is silent, the external noises quiet down and the internal struggle to trust intensifies. This internal test strips away superficial faith and reveals the bedrock of your spirit. Think of a tree in a drought. The leaves may wither, the branches may appear dry, but the roots beneath the surface determine survival. Silence is the drought that tests your roots. If your roots are deep in God, you will not wither. Your unseen foundation will hold you steady. The story of Job illustrates this beautifully. Job lost his wealth, his health, and his family. Yet God was silent. Job's friends offered explanations, but none comforted him. The silence forced Job to wrestle with what he truly believed about God. His faith was refined, not shattered, by this season. When God is silent, it's a spiritual X-ray that reveals the state of your heart. It shows whether your faith is dependent on blessings or on God Himself. Those who endure silence with peace demonstrate a faith anchored beyond circumstances. This season also invites self-examination. Are you depending on your own understanding, on human strength, on quick solutions? Silence exposes false dependencies so you can realign your trust. In modern times, many depend on instant communication, constant reassurance, and immediate feedback. When God is silent, it feels like withdrawal, but it is more often a divine reset. The silence invites you to find sustenance in the Spirit, not in signals or signs. Silence offers a testing ground to build resilience. If your trust fluctuates with every change, it will not endure the storms of life. But if silence reveals a deep reliance on God alone, your faith grows unshakable. Hard moments accompanied by God's silence serve as a forge for character development. Like steel tempered by fire, your spirit is strengthened through trials where answers do not come quickly. Silence compels patience, humility, and perseverance, qualities essential for spiritual maturity. When God does not immediately intervene, you learn to wait without bitterness or doubt. Waiting with a humble heart prepares you for the responsibilities God entrusts to mature believers. Consider how the Apostle Paul described suffering. He viewed hardships as opportunities to develop perseverance, character, and hope. Each stage built upon the previous, shaping him into a vessel strong enough to carry God's message to the world. Spiritual maturity means learning to trust God's timing and purposes, even when they are unclear. Silence teaches that growth is often invisible and slow. Seeds planted underground take time to sprout, but they develop roots essential for future fruitfulness. Silence can also teach humility. When God is quiet, pride is challenged. The tendency to control outcomes, demand immediate answers, or become self-sufficient is confronted. This humbling process draws you closer to God, deepening your relationship. In real life, athletes understand this principle well. Their progress is not measured only by visible wins, but by hours spent training, enduring fatigue, and pushing limits without immediate applause. Similarly, spiritual growth during silence is unseen but foundational. This process also increases empathy. Those who have experienced silence and hardship develop a heart that understands others in pain. Their maturity equips them to minister with compassion, patience, and wisdom. One example is the story of Joseph, who endured years of silence through betrayal and imprisonment. That season molded his character, preparing him to govern a nation with wisdom and grace. Silence is also a test of integrity. Without visible results or public recognition, maintaining faithfulness becomes a personal choice. The silent moments distinguish those who serve God for His sake from those motivated by reward or approval. Spiritual maturity developed in silence equips you for leadership. It prepares you to bear burdens, guide others, and steward God's blessings with wisdom. When God is silent during your hardest moments, it often means He is preparing you for something greater than you can imagine. Silence is not an absence of God's activity, but a season of preparation and refinement before the breakthrough. It is a sacred pause in which unseen work is being done within you. In life, we sometimes become impatient when blessings delay. We expect progress to be immediate and results visible. Yet, The greatest blessings often come after seasons of silence. The silence is God's workshop where He shapes your abilities, builds your faith, and aligns your heart with His will. Consider the story of Joseph. His silence came through years of imprisonment and betrayal, no visible hope, no immediate release. Yet during this silent season, God was preparing him to become a leader who would save nations. The silence was a preparation, not punishment. God's preparation in silence also involves equipping you spiritually. When the blessings come too early, the heart may not be ready to steward them well. In the silence, God grows your patience, teaches humility, and deepens your wisdom. These qualities are essential to handle greater responsibility and blessing. Preparation often requires surrender. In silence, God is inviting you to release control and allow His timing to be perfect. Trusting God in silence aligns your heart with His divine plan. This surrender transforms you from a person seeking blessings into a person who carries them with grace and purpose. Sometimes, God's silence is about protecting you. If blessings came too soon, they might overwhelm or even harm you. The silent moments are a buffer, a time for God to strengthen your foundation so that when the blessings arrive, you will be ready to receive and sustain them. Preparation also involves learning to depend on God's presence rather than His gifts. Many people chase blessings without knowing the giver. Silence draws you into deeper intimacy with God, teaching you to cherish Him above what He gives. Real-life examples abound. Athletes endure rigorous training, often in silence and solitude, before achieving championship glory. Artists spend countless hours practicing, unseen and unrecognized, before their talents shine on stage. The same principle applies spiritually. Silence is training for your future victory. This preparation is not passive waiting, it's active growth, studying, praying, developing skills, and cultivating character. The silent season is a time to build the internal strength that will carry you through the joy and challenge of future blessings. God's preparation in silence is a sacred process that readies you for the next level. It's His way of ensuring that when the breakthrough comes, you will not only receive it, but also sustain it with wisdom and grace. When God is silent during your most difficult moments, it is a profound invitation to trust His sovereignty, His complete authority and control over all things. Silence challenges you to acknowledge that God's ways and timing are beyond human understanding. In the silence, you confront the limits of your control. You realize that not everything depends on your efforts, plans, or timing. God's sovereignty means He rules over every circumstance, even when He seems quiet or distant. Trusting God's sovereignty requires surrender. It means accepting that some questions will remain unanswered for now, and that God's purposes are often hidden in the unseen. It calls for humility to believe that God is working all things together for good, even when evidence suggests otherwise. The story of Daniel in the lion's den illustrates trust in God's sovereignty amid silence. Daniel was faithful, yet God did not immediately intervene to stop the threat. In the silence of the den, Daniel trusted that God ruled over the lions and his fate, demonstrating unwavering faith in God's sovereign power. Silence also invites reflection on God's past faithfulness. When answers delay, remembering previous times God acted builds confidence that He remains in control. This remembrance strengthens your resolve to trust Him, even when the current silence is hard to bear. God's sovereignty means no storm, pain, or hardship is outside His control. The silence is not abandonment, but a sign that God's plan is unfolding according to His perfect wisdom. Trusting this reality transforms despair into hope. Human history is full of examples where God's sovereign timing proved better than human impatience. Stories of delayed blessings, miracles after long waits, and victory following silence remind us that God's ways are higher than ours. Embracing God's sovereignty also means letting go of anxiety and fear. When you trust that God is in control, you can face trials with peace, knowing that your life is held by a power greater than any challenge. This trust is not passive resignation, but active confidence. It empowers you to persevere, worship, and pray in silence, knowing that God's sovereign hand guides every detail of your story.